All right, so everything is being recorded. There's a transcript going on. I'm going to get rid of that. You already see my screen. The session today for the DFW Power BI users group is DAX queries in Power BI. I don't have my camera on. Let me do that too. All right, so I don't have the fancy stuff where I'm presenting myself, but if you see the camera views and you see the presentation, hopefully you'll be able to see me as well. Okay, so DAX queries in Power BI desktop, right? So I have my hat from Italy on today because we'll be talking about DAX. So hopefully y'all know the reference there. Introducing myself, I'm Kevin Arnold. I'm in this Dallas-Fort Worth area. I actually reside in Plano, so I'm in Plano almost all the time. Have a company here in Dallas called Expert Analytics, where we do consulting around Power BI, data engineering, other whatever within the data space. So if you're in need of something, please reach out to me or um, come to one of these meetups that's with the Power BI user group. Somebody mentioned they joined the Thursday ones. We have one every Thursday, and we have once a month on the first Tuesday, we have a presentation. So the Thursday one is kind of like free consulting. Come out, ask your questions. I help give answers as far as I can. And then if you need more, you could always reach out to me afterwards and we could talk about if you need something. But most of the time we get people going there, so it works out pretty well. Here's my LinkedIn profile. It's going to be Kev Arnold. I'm also Kev Arnold on Twitter. Pretty much all of the things I try to just stick with Kev Arnold on. And if you see this little avatar, the devil over my shoulder there, that's my online presence. So I like myself with a hat a whole lot better than I do without it. So that was something my daughter made years ago and just has lived. Okay, so let me copy this and put it into the chat. This is the set of resources that I used, links that I found along the way. Oh, Tim, I just saw your message. Yes, Marco and Alberto would be proud of me. And anytime that I find more things about the DAX query function in Power BI Desktop, I keep adding to this. This link will automatically keep refreshing for you if you want to ever refer back to it. In fact, I just added another YouTube video today from John Kursky, I think is how his last name's pronounced. And I'm going to see him this weekend again in Austin. There's a SQL Saturday in Austin, and both him and I are speaking at. So he does a lot with DAX queries and has good testing patterns. If we have some time, we kind of talk through some of the stuff that he's put together. Every time we get together at conferences, we start talking about what we find and collaborate on better ways to kind of keep using this feature. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. All right, so our agenda for today, I got just 4 high-level things. You would think off with 4 high-level things, we'd get through it pretty quickly, but I'm going to kind of take my time. I welcome questions throughout any of these topics. So just feel free to come off mute and just interrupt me if when it's a good time, or if you want to use the raise your hand feature, you can do that too. I'll try to see it, or Amin as the presenter will see it and he could interrupt me. Amin could also help watch the chat. I'll see it. I'm pretty good about seeing everything all at once. So however you want to communicate with me, I love having conversations during the presentation. So, we'll talk about what are queries, what are measures, how queries are used in Power BI desktop. We're going to talk a little bit about your measure development process. So kind of think about to yourself now as I'm going through it, because I'm going to ask for some input there, is how do you do measure development today, right? And if you need to change it, how you know things work correctly. And then I'll show you what this feature opens up. And then last, we should still have enough time. There's these great new DAX functions that begin with info, and we'll see how we could use those to get information about our model and even produce a basic data dictionary. All right, So let's jump right into it. Measures versus queries. Most of the time when people are working with DAX, I would say 80–90% of the time when somebody says DAX, they're thinking a DAX measure. But DAX really works with queries. And if you think about a query, if a lot of people know SQL, a query is something that returns a result set as a table. So it returns a table like a SQL statement, which we have here. Where a measure, and these are the definitions that have come off, I think the Microsoft site is where I have them. It's a dynamic calculation where the results change, and this is what Tim mentioned earlier, the price to get in, depending on context, right? And then there's row context, filter context. So mostly when you're thinking about what your filter context is, the result of your measure changes based upon that context. So where do we see queries used today, right? Well, everything that Power BI does to get the data from the backend model is generated as a DAX query first. So you have a set of visuals on the screen, you change a slicer, a new query gets produced and sent to the back end. Or actually even multiple queries, right? Because every visual produces a DAX query, gets sent to the back end and gets resolved out. It's just the DAX engine, the Vertipack engine is extremely fast at solving these queries, right? So we tend not to think about how many queries are being sent until we get to have performance problems. But there are a lot of DAX queries, and we'll see what one looks like here in just a little bit. But if you're also doing paginated reports, I like to sometimes do paginated reports off of the data set itself, and you have to have a DAX query inside of that. The um, the paginated report builder, which ironically is called Report Builder, I believe, right? Power BI Report Builder, which only builds paginated reports, not Power BI reports. I've had a few people call out that weird name. So it will help you generate that query, and then you can modify it from there. I'm a little bit strange on this. If I'm doing a query into a paginated report, I usually develop it by hand because I like the challenge and I like how my stuff comes out a little bit better than how the generated query comes out. And then within calculated tables, um, that's really a DAX query that's happening back again to the back end that is going to be producing and standing up that calculated table. Unfortunately, calculated tables introduce calculated columns, and we're always supposed to say no calculated columns. It happens though. Okay. So what does a DAX query look like? Well, on this left side of the screen, I have a very simple Power BI visual that is just a column chart. And you can see it's filtered down to year 2018. And let me go ahead and zoom into this since that doesn't look as great the way it pixelates, but trust me, that's 2018. And then we could see the DAX query that's produced from there. So let's kind of walk through this a little bit and see kind of what it's doing. I'm going to try to relate this a little bit to SQL and kind of work backwards from there. So I am going to start in this evaluate area. Now, when I read evaluate, and if I'm trying to translate that into SQL, I change that to select, right? So this is kind of the start of my select statement. I know that whatever's going to happen after this is going to return a table because it's going to be a query. Next, this has um, a variable that it's using, right? In this case, it's DS0 primary windowed. I could put my query right here, but this is the way Power BI tends to write a lot of its queries that it generates and sends to the back end. It's just a style that they like because there's things that they're doing within it, and we'll see that here in just a second. But this obviously points right here. So this variable itself is a query, if I could think of what the right thing to use. So here's the query. This top n, and the first number is saying how many rows to return from the top, which is 1001. It's going to use another variable, and that didn't come out too well. It's looking at calendar month. It's going to say use calendar month to help sort by to get it to get that and sort. I believe one is the default, so I believe that's ascending. This is calendar month number, sorry, and then this is calendar month. Now, the reason that we have calendar month number and calendar month in our queries here is because this model, right? We noticed on the visual itself, we're not doing anything by calendar month number, but the semantic models has this month number set to sort calendar month. So this is how Power BI knows and takes all that data and puts it into, again, a query. And you'll see that this main query up here that's being used is really what we need to kind of focus on. And you're going to see summarized columns a lot within queries, especially through Power BI, right? It loves to use summarized columns. It's one of the best functions out there for queries. And it's usually where I start with. And I'm going to show you guys a couple other um, functions that I tend to focus on here in just a minute. Okay, so let's kind of, we're coming backwards now. We're working up the top here. We have DS core in this top end, and this DS core itself is just another query to summarize columns. And then we already talked about why month and month number is in here, because month number is sorting month. And its next parameter is the ability to filter. You provided a table that does the filtering. And we'll come back up. That's this here. We'll talk about this in just a second. And now this line becomes our measure and how we want to name that measure. And it just so happens it's using the exact same name that it's coming across, from the measure name itself. Somebody, when I first gave this presentation, they kind of pointed out that when we write DAX, one of the things we tend not to do is qualify a measure name with the table name. But Power BI's generation of a DAX query doesn't follow that best practice. Again, it's just a best practice. It's not syntactically wrong, but we tend to say only qualify the columns, not the measures, so that it's easier to read and easier to debug. So you're going to see that be different with anything that is generated by Power BI. Okay, so if I was writing that, this part wouldn't be here. Okay, so now the last part of this whole query here is this filter table, which is using the treat as command. And again, you could come and learn more on that on the live stream on Friday. And it's coming right from this filter here. This filter is generating this statement here, where the year has to be 2018. That generates a treat as statement to say treat the value of 2018, which you'll see it's in curly brackets. So it's saying treat this as a table. It's a one column, one row table. And that table is a placeholder for calendar year. And then that's what gets used here. So now trying to put it all together, right? Power BI or the DAX engine itself automatically figures out what tables to use, right? So if I would kind of guess at the model, and I don't have the model in here, I would say that there's going to be a sales table, right? That's going to have the unit price on it. And that total unit price is going to be just a sub function. The measure is going to be a sum unit price, right? Which is going to make it into the total unit price. So it kind of reads as select from the calendar table, count month and month number, sum unit price. And if we think about it in SQL, it's going to be a where clause where calendar year equals 2018, group by month and month number, because those first two are group by indicators. And then that's what it's going to return is that table, whatever table happens to come out from that. So hopefully that kind of helps us. And then at the very bottom, right, this is the one part I decided to keep last, is going to be our order by, right? Which again, we could have an order by on a SQL statement. Going to order it by month number first, then the calendar month, so that everything displays out correctly. So that's kind of the breakdown of how queries look. And once you kind of get used to writing queries, I find that I could write better measures or understand the measures more, because I could imagine some of the context that we were talking about, because I could understand the columns that are all inside the query, the filtering and everything else. I'm going to pause for just a quick sip of water. If anybody has any questions or anything they want to add to or ask about on this part.
Well, Kevin, I'll go ahead and ask a question. This is Amin.
Uh-huh.
So, your year slicer or whatever that you've got in the filter there in the visual, that is coming from the calendar table, right? So this treat as that's in the query, it constructs that to sort of build what we created when we put that in the filter pane.
Correct.
I don't know. Is that
correct?
Okay?
Yeah. So if I just draw, oops, wrong one. But if I draw here to here, yes, this is constructing this. Was that your question?
Yeah, it was. I guess I never look at these, and I kind of thought, like, isn't that automatic? But I guess this is the automatic part that it's doing that. Like that when I see a treat as, I'm thinking like, oh, it found the number 2018 somewhere else, like on some input parameter, and it has to convince Power BI, please use this number 2018 as a year. But it really came in as a year. I mean, it was pulled in from the calendar table from the year column. And then it's being told again, yes, you are the year column of the calendar table.
Right, because when this query is sent off, when this query is produced, it has no connection to the front end visuals. It doesn't know any of that anymore. The front end visuals are used to generate these queries. And you could write these queries without visuals. So therefore, the visual has no understanding of the queries. Or the queries have no understanding of the visuals. That's the better way to say that. Right? So everything
Right.
that your visuals are trying to communicate has to be turned into the one query sent back for that visual.
Right. Now I think I'm starting to slowly understand it. So that it's kind of like if you had a literal, you were talking about thinking of it as a where clause, and you had 2018 as a literal, and then you said, I don't need this literal to be interpreted as the year in the calendar table. That's really what the treat as. Is that fair? Kind of way. Do you know what I mean by literal? Like it's like this code runs 2018 is just a number.
Yes.
And it's like, that's not just a number. That really is a year in the calendar table. Is that what treat as is going to do?
And that's what this is telling it to be.
Yeah, gotcha.
Is treat this number, this literal that was selected just because it was the filter pane.
I gotcha.
But it has to be the year that's in the calendar
This is
table.
the blue. Okay, Jack has his hand up because he's a good protocol follower. Thank you, Jack.
Okay, go ahead, Jack.
I'm just confused about the treat as, because isn't your calendar table related to the information in your sales order lines? Why is it using treat as? I would have expected it to using some sort of relationship.
Well, there could be a relationship, right? But it has to pass back this information from the front end to the generated query. Because remember, all the engine sees is the generated query. Think about that once this is once the Power BI visuals generated this query, the query has to have everything about it sent back to the engine.
But
Well, Jack,
when you
yeah.
use your total unit price measure, and that's a measure, correct?
Correct.
That's not a field. So when you use that measure, isn't it using the expanded table that's associated with that, which includes the calendar table?
Which the expanded table comes from this. Because the query itself is starting now to limit down how you're using the model. And so you have to tell it with this treat as that you want to get this value of 2018 into calendar year. And then calendar year is going to be filtered down to 2018, and the relationship back to the fact table is going to do, right, that filtering. If there wasn't a relationship between the calendar table and the fact table, this treat as would do nothing.
Okay.
Does that help saying it that way?
Yeah, I was just kind of surprised to see the treat as function, but I guess that's its way of just saying initiate that.
Correct. It's a way of the front end communicating to the back end.
Okay.
Because once the front end generates its query, it's done. And it's just saying, hey, I'm generating a query. You give me a result and I'm going to display that result.
Okay.
Right?
Cool.
Think of it like a disconnected architecture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
Great
based on this conversation, it's kind of like you drag that, from the field well, you drag year in here or whatever. And then in a way, it kind of forgets when it goes create the query. It doesn't forget it, but it doesn't really, it doesn't come along with the query creation that 2018 came from year. That's why it bakes in the treat as to like keep that connection before that it came from year.
Right. It has to tell it what it's using it for.
Yeah.
Because the back end doesn't loop back and check things into the front end. So the front end generates a query, the query gets executed on its own, right? It knows nothing else except what's in this query. And what the semantic, it knows what the semantic model looks like, right? So if you put this treat as in there and you didn't have a relationship from calendar to your fact table, it would be effectively doing nothing. But treat as we'll talk about on Friday, on Fabric Fridays, could be used for a whole lot of other things. This is how the Power BI front end uses it to communicate to generate the query for the back end. And then kind of catching up a little bit on the chat, I see Fernando is asking, like, the calendar, it's filtering the calendar table to one record. Well, maybe not, right? Because there's going to be multiple rows, right? If we're talking rows in that calendar table with the year 2018, it's filtering the column down to one value, but the date is probably what's connected to the fact table. There's going to be multiple dates within that year 2018 that is being joined over to the fact table. So what happens, maybe it's a good time to cover this. Fernando's asking, what happens if you filter by another dimension, i.e. product category or country? Okay, great question. If you added like either a slicer here, right, or something else into the filter pane here, you would see multiple treat as's, right? So if I did both product category and country, I would see another treat as for the values that the slicer selected for product category, and then a third treat as for, say, country, Mexico, and then those two filter tables would be added after this one, because you could put multiple. Can I do it? Maybe we could do it when I get over to the demo part. And then I could write it and we could kind of see it. That might be a good exercise. Okay.
That sounds great.
Great conversation. Good thoughts here. Okay, yeah, because a lot of people, I think it is kind of challenging to switch from thinking of measures to queries, right? But when I started doing this, a lot of things started coming back to me. Yeah. Damn DAX is what he says in the chat. Enjoy DAX. DAX is simple, but it's not easy. Right?
No, it is not simple. I refuse to. We could have another hour about that later. Just keep going. Let's not get
Okay,
sidetracked.
we'll do that off recording. All right. So we saw a couple functions that you tend to use more in queries than you use in measures, right? It doesn't mean that these can't be used in measure, with one caveat. Right now, summarize columns do not use in a measure. The context is not passed over, right? I believe I've heard that they may be changing that in the future. I don't know. To me, it doesn't make sense to use it in a measure, just knowing what the function is supposed to do, but it doesn't mean that they may pass that on. But we saw treat as. I tend to use treat as a bunch of times when I'm writing my own DAX query, because every filter I set up as a new treat as. And again, even if I'm treating it as the column that's on that table, not to generate something unique for anything else. Calculate table is another one that I use quite a bit. Top N, we've seen. Filter, a lot of people use filter. The point being is all of the functions that you use after evaluate, or the functions used in the variable that you have after the evaluate, must turn a result set, must return a table. Now, if you want to only put in, say, one value, and card visuals do this a whole lot. Say you just put a measure into the card visual, you're not filtering it, you're not changing anything. You could use the row function, which takes you can name it and then give it like a measure, and it'll turn that into a one row, one column table. And you could do it to where you could set up multiples in there and stuff like that, but that's the simple example for row. Or the curly brackets will change the scale your value to a table as well, the one row, one column table. So that's actually when we saw the treat as, right? And you saw the one value for 2018 surrounded by, these brackets. Oops, I didn't want to zoom in, right? Surrounded by these, that was turning it into a table. Okay. So we're going to jump into some of the demos. I didn't cover earlier, but this is a preview feature, so you do need to turn the preview feature on. We'll look at that real quick. We'll do a query, and we'll also look at some of the quick queries, and maybe we'll mess around with the queries that you guys were asking about. I do want to show you how to capture a query from a visual and how we could define measures. So let me bring up my desktop. And this is a sample data set that was actually used by Microsoft Zoe when she released the feature. It's in the links to the feature itself. I'm not going to claim that I'm an expert on everything that's in this data set, but let's first cover turning on the preview feature. If you haven't turned on preview features before, you got to come all the way down here now to options and settings, go to options, wait for it to come up. And we're going to go to our preview features, page down a little bit, zoom in, since we're on the computer. And you see we turn on DAX Query view right here.
I see you haven't turned on object interaction, Kevin.
Not on this one. I have multiple versions of desktop installed, so this is what I use for demos and for other type of stuff. But no, that's not a conversation for today. So that does require a restart of desktop. So if you haven't turned it on before, when you click it, it's going to tell you you need a restart. You have to close down and come back in. Okay. So then once you have it turned on, you will see this fourth icon on your side pane on the left side. right? So we have report, we have tables, relationships, and now we have DAX. So let's go ahead and just click right into DAX view, and you'll see it's going to come up with a query for us already. And this is just their example one. They're going to pick a table from your model. They just happen to pick store here. So even if you do this in your own, you should end up with something there. All right, so we already kind of saw top N, right? So we know it's going to get the top number of rows, and it's going to be the top 100, and it's going to be from the store table. So the way that we execute this is we click run, that runs, and then we get our table listed down below, right? Yay, hey, it's great. So this is only going to give us 100 rows. We could see at the bottom here that it just did. Oops, sorry, I can't get rid of that now. It just did the 100 rows, right? We could change it to say we want to do 10, we could do 1,000, we could edit this, and run it as much as we want. We could also come here and name our query. And when we save this model, I believe this one is being saved currently as a PBIX file. When we save the PBIX file, this is stored with the PBIX file. So this means it will be here the next time you open up this file. The other nice thing is if you like to use the newer, it's another preview feature called PBIP. If you use that format, it again saves it. It keeps the linkage for the model, but it's actually a separate file on your drive. So you can just open the DAX query right there. And you can see up here, we got a little reminder telling us DAX queries will be saved with your model, right? So they're not visible when you publish to the service, but they are every time that you use the PBIX file. What I'm wondering, it's a good question. I should have tested it. I'm glad you asked. If I publish the PBIX and then I download that, I wonder if they're still going to be there. My hope would be yes. I don't do my publishing that way much anymore, but maybe I'll have to try and test that. Okay, so let's see a couple other things that we could do going across the ribbon real quick. Format the query, because any DAX code will not run unless it's properly formatted. Well, it does run, but I like having my DAX code properly formatted. It makes it easier to run, and it runs faster. That's what I meant to say. Not that it won't run. It will run faster if it's formatted. Okay, maybe not. You could comment out or uncomment out code so that you could keep different things in there, find, replace. This command palette is kind of neat. A lot of people like kind of going through there to see different things you could do with the keyboard commands. Just you won't be able to see my fingers, but like if I wanted to comment this out, I could do it with a keyboard command of Control K and C. You see that comments it, Control K and U, uncomments it, and that's documented up here in this.
Kevin?
Yes.
Have you noticed, are those keyboard shortcuts the same as another tool like VS Code or SSMS, or I don't know? Does it remind you?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, the majority of them, if you do at least like I think SQL does controls KC, a bunch of other ones do as well. Some just do Control K or Control C or whatever, and Control U. But they're all really, really close. So this is based, I think Visual Studio Code does it the same way. I think this reuses a lot of the commands from that. Okay. But if you're ever in question, then just kind of look up here. All right, some of the other things that we could do is if we kind of look at store itself, and I'm going to expand this pane out a little bit. We could right click on this and come out here, and now we have these quick queries, right? So just like what was originally generated at top 100 from store. Another thing that's really kind of nice is this show column statistics. If you want to understand the column statistics that are going on, it will generate that query for you. So this is generating column statistics for every column in store, and you could see it here. Here's the table, the column name, what our count is, what our distinct values, all of this type of stuff. So you could get an idea of the profile of your data once it gets into Power BI. Yeah, there's something like this. Maybe not have all the same things that it's in Power Query, but this is what your final table looks like once it got into Power BI, right? So a little bit different reasoning behind it. What else did we have here if I click on that? Okay, so define measures in table, define all measures in this table. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. But these are all, kind of simple queries. Let's come back over here and let's say we want to get the query from this visual. We can come up to optimize and turn on performance analyzer and start recording. And hopefully you all have looked at performance analyzer before, right? It helps you figure out why, or visuals that are running slowly, maybe figure out why, but it also captures the DAX. So I'm going to say analyze this visual, and you'll see I have an entry here now. And if I come over here, I could do a copy query, or even better, run in DAX Query View. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to click Run on DAX Query View. You see it opened up a new query. And remember how we were talking about how the Power BI generates the query? This looks a lot like it, right? Following the same pattern, coming from the bottom up. We got our order by, but let's skip that, or evaluate, which is our select. So we're going to select from the variable primary windowed, which is a top N of DS0 core, which, again, they keep following the same pattern, but our true query is in this summarize of DS0 core. And this automatically, when it brought it in, it ran it. I could change this, right? I'm going to go ahead and comment this out and just tell it that I want to use underscore underscore. And you see it's got IntelliSense DS0 core. If I run this, it's not going to really look any different, right? Because this is just a top end of that. And we only have 8 rows. But a lot of times when I'm working with a query, I'll move out this primary window and just start working with either the DS core, or I name when I write my, oh, can I zoom in? Yes, thank you, Fernando, because this has a nice little feature that I could just hit control and the wheel on my mouse, and it makes it bigger. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so what I did was change from using the primary window to DS core. So you could see that I have 2 measures within here. And if I hover over the measures, it shows me the definition for those measures. Anybody have any issue with this measure? Nobody?
Well, I mean, it's doing a division and it's not. Oh, I see. It's doing the if not equals 0, then do it. Otherwise, I'm trying to.
What's the best practice for doing it?
I mean, use divide instead. Isn't that what it's been?
Yes.
It feels like it's been 6 months since I was doing any DAX. After you make that point, can we go back and look at the measure that, not the measure, the visual that you clicked on to, I don't even remember what was in the visual. Which one was it? This one. Okay, so those were the 2 measures, this year's sales and the percentage. Okay, gotcha.
But also, let's do this now, right? Let's escape out of this. And I'm going to open up a filter pane. And I'm going to notice we didn't have any other treat as or anything. So I am going to come down here and I'm going to select a couple months. I only want 3 months. Okay. Let me clear this out just for fun. And I'm going to go ahead and say analyze this visual to make sure we got the right query. Now I'm going to come back in and say run in DAX Query View, and I'm going to get a whole new query. And you see what I get up top? This is the treatise that we were talking about. So it's those 3 selections that I made for the dimension is called time in this case instead of date. Fiscal month has to be equal to either January, February, or March. You can think of it as an in. Yeah, I didn't make this model. So thanks, Fernando. No, it didn't get named the calendar. It got named as time. Some people do that, right? And then you see it added this filter table in the summarize. And if we look at summarize, because it tells us, it gives us an idea of what the function looks like. It gives us the signature. So we could specify as many group by columns as we want, then filter tables, and we could put as many filter tables as we want. So that's what the underscore DS0 filter table is. Then the name and the expression. The expression a lot of times is going to be your DAX measure.
So seeing this behind the scenes makes me think that I should not name my measures and tables with double underscores in the front. Is that correct?
I think it will just keep adding things to there, but as long as it works, and if you want to do it for your own reason, have at it. I don't
No,
know
I
if
was thinking, I
future,
was kind of joking.
I don't
The
know if
scope?
future you would like that, but okay.
But the scope, what I mean is like they're not locally scoped these things. Like this DSO filter table, does it only live here? It only
Yes,
lives in this define?
it only lives in this
Oh,
query,
okay.
this particular query, because in this
Right.
query,
Because there's a different one. Right. That'd
right,
be
even
different.
though
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is named exactly the same, right? If I run this query again, the S0
Sure.
core has a different result than
Right.
this DS0 core.
Yeah. And even if I had something called underscore DS0 core out in my model, this is going to shadow what it's called, shadow that. It's going to override that basically.
It's going to make some other name for it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's going to keep it. It's going to fix. Yeah. I wouldn't say fix it, but it's going to make it different. Right.
Gotcha.
Okay. Let me just kind of come back to my presentation. All right. So I do want to show you that we could define measures there. I knew I was missing one other thing. All right. So we have these measures, right? We're hovering over, we could see it. So let's find this measure in our model. One of the things I think I gave him as feedback, or maybe somebody else, because I'd like to just be able to right click on this here and say define that, but I have to come over, find it in the model, and then I'm going to say quick queries. Oh, this is interesting, because if I say define and evaluate, it's going to make it as a whole new DAX query. Let's go ahead and do that. So now you see I got query 4, and it defined my measure. So this is what it looks like in the model. And in this case, it's still using the summarized columns. And in this, it has no group by columns or anything. It uses this to turn it into a table. Right. And if you remember what I was saying before, something else we could do, in addition to saying you could have multiple evaluate statements here, is I could turn this into a 1-row table by simply wrapping it with the curly brackets. So if I run this, you'll see I have result set 1, which is the first evaluate, result set 2, which is the second evaluate, and they're both going to be exactly the same. It's the first one was actually able to be named by the way the summarized columns work. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, so we can see how to define measures, we could just do it into this define part up top, right? So a query itself has a define section and then this one or more evaluate sections, okay? So let's come back over here and let's actually do it in our very first query. I already have a define section laid out, so I'm going to just bring over my measure definition. And because I don't like the way that's set up, I'm going to format it. Now, do you notice what popped up?
Could, yeah. Sorry, that was rhetorical. Yeah.
So now we have this option to say update model, overwrite measure, because all I did was format it. So if I wanted to come in here, define my measure, format it, and use it to save into my model a formatted version of the measure, I could do that. In fact, let's kind of go take a look at it. If I come back to my measure, my report definition part here, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted this without the brackets. Okay, so now if I come up here, you see I have my total sales, variant percent, and it's, all on one line. We're here in my DAX query, it's in multiple lines. I'm going to go ahead and click on this and say update model, overwrite measure. It's going to ask me if I'm sure, because once you do this, you cannot use Control Z to back it out. Okay, so just be very careful. So now if I say update model, it did it. If I come back over here, bring the measure up again, see how it's now formatted. So this is a real good way to modify the measures in your model, but what you could really do is test them first. So let's move on from this part to our measure development. Remember, I told you I was going to ask a question. Oh my goodness, I'm pushing way against time with all these questions that we have. That's all right. We could go as long as y'all want. So how do you do measure development today? Well, on the left side of the screen is how I think most people do it. They create a measure within desktop, right, in that screen that I just showed. They create visuals and they put the measure on there. They change the measure by overwriting it multiple times, and they're kind of like, well, what was this? What was that? I've seen a lot of people will put comments, comment code out, this, that, the other, or they'll produce another measure, hide it, delete it, give it a, like my total unit price 1, total unit price 2, total unit price 3. And then it's like, well, which one is the one that I actually want to use? And, somebody comes and interrupts you, and all of a sudden you come back 3 days later, and future you says, why did you do this to me? Right? With what I just showed you in DAX queries, we have a whole new process now that we can use, and I would suggest using it. I use it quite a bit. Shut up, boys. Yes, Fernando. Love these comments. All right, so you can start a new query like I showed. Bring over, you could even add comments into that. You saw the comments in the very first one. When we go back to desktop, I'll show you about adding comments. We talked about commenting things out, but you could put in comments about what are your new requirements? What are you trying to define? Define that measure within that query and the queries to test the measure. Then you can sit there and make changes to it and repeat until you get the results that you want. And then use that overwrite feature to write it back to the model once you have it and you're sure about it, right? So let's kind of walk through that a little bit. Remember what we were saying is this measure doesn't follow really the best practices, right? The whole thing could be done with just the divide function. So what I'm going to do is actually repeat this measure, and I'm going to call this, I'm going to put original at the end of it. Okay. Now both are still the exact same. Notice it's still asking me, do I want to update the model? Now it's telling me this is a new measure, and I'm not going to bother doing that. But down in my query, because I want to make sure everything works correctly, I'm going to add another line that I'm just going to call orig. And notice the only place this measure exists is inside this query, but IntelliSense for this query finds it. Okay. So let's kind of think about that, because if I come back over to this query and I try to do that same thing, Notice it never, the IntelliSense doesn't find it because it's not within the scope of this query, because it's only within this query that I have it in my define section. So what that also means is I could override it without overriding, I could override this first one without changing anything in my model. But let's first do a run and say, see how the values are the same, right? Which is what our expectation would be because the code's exactly the same. So you can set up this type of test by capturing the query from the visual, define it and give it a new name. And now this is the one that I want to update. So I'm going to come here and comment this out with our keystrokes that we were talking about earlier. And I'm going to do divide. And I want to just do just like I have here. I could copy it. Because live demos make me scared. Okay. So now, and I'm going to go ahead and actually delete this part of the code out. My expectation is that these two values should still be exactly the same. And you can see they are. So if I had an expectation that I was changing results and the test data and I said, I wanted this value to be higher, lower, whatever, I knew what I wanted it to be. I could keep doing that type of test and that change until I get it the way I want it to be. And now I could just come in and say update model, overwrite measure. Again, it's going to warn me. And now we've just successfully modified a measure. Guaranteed we're going to have the same results. We're not messing anything up. And we have our test case saved. Once I save this, and I could say, I could call it something different, test case, and I'll get to you in just a second, Amin. I'm going to call it for percent just for simple things. You could add comments in here, additional documentation, whatever's going to help you understand, right? I think slash asterisk I could use, or yeah. And then asterisk slash is going to be my block comment, right? Whatever I want to do so that my future self likes me and says, hey, this is what you were doing. Amin, did you have a question, a comment?
Yeah, it may seem really minor. I'm just curious how it decides on how many decimal places in the output. Like if you were in a visual, you could adjust it, right? If you wanted to like see really what's going on. And how would you like, let's say the differences there were different. Let's say they were different when you change the measure, but it were in the 10,000th decimal place because of whatever you're doing. Like, how did it decide to do 2 decimal places?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. I know since this is in preview, and I have seen some public things about the how it does the display, right? Because you notice the second line isn't displaying any decimal places at all.
Yeah, that's probably
and that's been some feedback given to him because I did run into a case that I was using where I think they only showed me 2 decimal places, but the third decimal place started changing, or they actually, the way it happened, it rounded all the way up to 1. But if I go and looked at the visual itself, it was showing me the multiple decimal places. So I think that's going to be an improvement coming within desktop, right? And keep giving that type of feedback back onto ideas that Fabric or Power BI or whatever. But yeah, that is an area that I think they need to improve a little bit. Now, on the measure itself, you still have to come back to this view or one of the other views and be able to do this changing of this percentage to produce this format string. But in the DAX query, it doesn't use that format string. So James, thanks. Yeah, I think this is a game changer as well. I think it's a huge game changer on how, to modify your measures and make sure they work. If you do nothing else from today, at least start doing that part. and then start reading the queries and understand the queries and really start understanding them. Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. I have just a little bit more that I could jump into. We already talked a demo of creating and modifying measures. So we're going to talk a little bit about, and I just remembered what I forgot to set up today. Using the info, and I did this on purpose, right? You could, through these info functions, access information about the model schema. And where you hear this referred to out a whole lot is what's called the dynamic management views, or DMVs. So they've turned those into over 50 DAX functions. Here's 4 of the most popular ones that you'll probably be using. That link that I gave out earlier that has my all the different pages for this, the links that I've collected, and I'm going to scramble for just a second because I'm going to try to actually get to that, because I have a GitHub repository within that. So let me actually kind of bring that over, and you'll see this is what that looks like. Right now there's 19 bookmarks in there. One of them contains DAX queries that I have been either pulling from internet articles that I find, or some of them I wrote myself. So you see there's this one here, relationships data Zoe. It's how the Microsoft person Zoe wrote it. I wrote another one that I'm calling columns with statistics, and I'm actually going to grab that code. So if you come here, you'll see, in this case, what is it? A 76 line DAX query. Let me go ahead and copy all of this. And then we'll bring it back into desktop. Start a new query, and let's walk through it just a little bit. Okay. And I know I'm kind of, because of time, I'm jumping into the deep end pretty quick here, but this is going to use the info.tables function, and it's getting into a variable columns from that for the table ID, the table name, storing that, like I said, into a variable, doing the same thing for info.columns, where the type is not equal to 3, which I think are hidden or special type of columns. It's documented in the other stuff that this is based upon. And then there's also this column statistics function. And I just remembered this query breaks in this model because they have a binary column in here. So I'm going to run this, but it's going to fail out. Let me see if I could open. Let me take desktop off and see if I have the other model real quick that I could open that this actually works in. I got to remember this for this weekend for when I give the presentation. I have both.
Kevin, do not answer Fernando's question.
I don't see it yet.
So I just wanted to ask, when you said binary, did you mean like data, like an image data or something, or do you mean like true false? Like
it's got some weird column type in there that the column statistics doesn't support. And let me see if I can remember what that was. It might be the territory field. Let me pull this one back over. Whatever it is, it's something that that function doesn't support right now. So they're going to have to kind of clean that up. They should either return nothing, but not throw an error. Right now they're throwing an error on it. But let's get it back to, here's another model that I have. This is just a familiar Contoso model. We go back over to DAX queries. Oh, you can see I already put it in there because this is what I used when I was in Atlanta. Okay, so the same query, now that you can see it. And it's going to save all these things to some temporary tables in memory. And then it comes down and it joins these different tables together using a natural inner join. And then that's where the results go to. So let's You see it's actually doing two natural joins because back here, it's doing another natural join where it's joining tables and columns together. And then it takes that and it joins the table columns that it produced in that previous step along with the column statistics. And if I run this without highlighting just one line, you'll see I have a result set that I could take and export out to say like Excel or whatever. That would be a data dictionary. So it's telling me here's the table, here's the column name. If there's a description, that description will be involved. The data category, if it's set, then it starts giving me statistics on it. The cardinality for that column, in this case, is 18,869, gives a minimum value, a maximum value, the max length. I think that's all. I can't remember. Oh no, yeah, that's all that it's pushing out on this one, right? But you can see how you could use this because you could just come here. There's a way to, if I do Control C, will that take it all to Excel? Hang on, I think I might have an Excel from work up, so I got to do it a different way. Oh, there was a copy function up there too. But if you see, I just select it all and do a Control C. I get all these values into Excel. Now, if somebody wants to say document your model, and I just want it in an Excel kind of quote unquote data dictionary, there's a very simple way of doing that. And we're going to find more ways of using these info functions, right? And I'll keep adding them to that GitHub repository, but this could help get you started.
Did you see, Kevin, did you see Fernando's question about DAX Studio?
I do. Yes, I just got there. So yeah, so DAX Studio and DAX Desktop slowly merging together. With this functionality, yes. And where I see myself not using DAX Studio as much is when I'm working on a model, and just to be clear, you have to have a local model to be working on this. So if you're connecting, like you have a model that's stored up on the service, and you're connecting to it with, as a thin report or whatever, your DAX query will not work. You have to have a local model. Now you can turn that into the composite model that we've talked about before, and you can run the queries on it. But DAX Studio helps out a little bit more there because it could just use the XMLA endpoint. The other thing that DAX Studio does that this doesn't do is gives you the performance information about a query. So if you're truly digging deep into the performance of a query, you're going to want to go to DAX Studio still. But yes, this will have less times that you have to go to a third-party tool to run your DAX queries. And it's exactly why Microsoft put that out there, because they keep running into a lot of shops that won't install third-party tools. So they can't install DAX Studio or Tabular Editor. This gives those shops a solution. All right, I think that's all I have. Let's kind of go back to, if I could find my presentation. I think I'm all, yeah, this was the last slide. I covered the info stuff obviously very quickly because I always get down to the end at the top of the hour on this. It's kind of meant to be that way. So if there's other questions, anything.
Well, can we give Kevin a round of virtual or actual applause? That just Kevin, I'm on with you all the time, but I mean, I just think this was marvelous. Not that you aren't always marvelous. I mean, but this was just really marvelous.
Well, thank you. Let me get the so Fernando, here's the GitHub directly. But also what you might want to do is keep with this link. It has the GitHub in this link as well. But anything else that I keep finding, and I keep adding to this collection. So you see there's some guy in the Cube videos for using this DAX queries. the actual Microsoft page, pages and everything. If you want to get really deep into some DAX stuff, Jeffrey Wang was on with Reed Havens. Marco talked about this in his Unplugged number 54. So yeah, I mean, just use this as a good resource out as a simple collection. And like I said, John has a lot of Kurski, Kerski. He likes this DAX query view as well because he introduces a way to introduce testing patterns. So you could have these DAX queries in your model and execute them over and over again for testing. So for a way to do DevOps / testing to make sure things still work. He's got an excellent series on all of that. We're again talking. Yeah, this is kind of the video was just put out a couple days ago, and this blog post was put out. I think February 28th is when I marked it, so it must have been close to that. But keep with him. It's an excellent resource for that.
Boy, there's a question from Hiral that Fernando, Tim, are kind of chatting on.
Okay.
you see the chat
how
there?
long does it take to learn DAX?
Oh boy.
Yeah, I'm new to this. I just started learning Power BI, so
yeah, DAX is it's got quite the learning curve to it. So you're going to start out, and I think, let me look at my camera. I think I could see it here correctly. Say you're here, this is your very bottom, your starting point. You're going to kind of do this, and then you're going to plateau for quite a while. And then you might do this and inch up a little bit from there, right? But most of us that have been working with, the specialized stuff that I kind of got into using the treatise and all the other type of stuff first, you start learning later on. You're going to start really learning your basic, what's going on with your functions like sum, average, and then get into the X functions that exist with that, like sum X, average X. And then that's what gets into what kind of Tim mentioned in here. Now you're going to start understand row context and filter context. Then you get into the calculate function, which helps you change filter context. So
do you have any playlist for starting with Power BI also? Like I am learning myself, like data modeling and all. I'm doing it myself. But if you
I don't know
have
that I have a pure playlist. The Microsoft Learn content has become my standard place of telling people to start. Now, the one thing the Microsoft Learn content's going to really push towards is the visualizations at first. In my mind, the order of learning should be your Power Query, which is kind of your data transformation layer, how you bring data in, how you start transforming it. Then in order to make the most out of your Power Query, you need to learn what's called the star schema approach.
Correct.
And learning what a star schema is, if you always push to put your data model into a star schema, you will start being more successful. Once you have that star schema down, okay? And some people kind of think of that as they denormalize the data because you do push some data down to the fact table that's always not naturally there. But if you're ever just trying to use the source system as it is, you're probably going to fail, right? You have to do data transformation in order for proper.
So, so Power Query and DAX both are different concepts.
Yes. Power Query is your data ingest and data transformation. And then from there, you produce a data model, and in that, what they call semantic model now, and that's where you start building out relationships and things like how we were saying, this column, I want you to sort it by this other column. Those are things that are included that you build into the semantic model. And once you do those two steps, the transformation and building your relationships, you have your semantic model, that should be in a good star schema. That's when you start writing DAX.
And also sometimes for transformation, for a single column also we write DAX, right?
Yes, but you're better off following what's called Roach's maxim, is make that transformation as far upstream as possible. So if you could do that transformation in Power Query, you're better off doing it in Power Query.
Okay.
You should avoid DAX columns, and I tend to use the word avoid. There are other people that I work very closely with that are hardcore. Do not ever use a DAX calculated column, right?
Okay.
So, and if you try to start yourself out that way, you're going to do better in the long run. Figure out how to make your transformation. Either if you're connecting to a SQL source, do it up in SQL. If you're not connecting to a SQL source, figure out how to do that in Power Query. And what everybody wants to jump to is first writing the DAX and writing the visuals. That should be, to me, many steps after you've already figured out your data transformation and how to produce your star schema. Then
I
you
think
write your
I'm
DAX.
comfortable with now star schema and transformation, but I don't have I don't have much knowledge about Power Query functions and all also. So hence, but
So
no,
where
actually,
are you doing your transformations today, in like a SQL database?
no, in Power BI only. So I have a SQL source, and from that I'm creating star schema, data modeling. But I know simple functions. I'm not proficient to use the transformation tool,
Okay.
properly. I mean, at an advanced or proficient level. I think that is what I was asking about. So once that is comfortable, even I have not started on visualization yet.
Yeah. Well,
Because
that's
Power BI is more famous for data modeling, I think, compared to visualization. So
definitely. And if you're starting from a SQL source, it sounds like the transformations are already occurring for you. And all you're doing is using you are using Power Query, whether you know it or not, because you're using Power Query to do that SQL call. And if you look in the transformation, if I bring my desktop back up.
No. I'm just okay. I'm connecting the SQL database, and automatically those table will come into me, right? I will not write any query for that. Excuse me.
No, yeah, I get that. But you still got to have this in order for that to happen. If you come to this transform data, this is Power Query right here.
Okay. Yeah, but I am not proficient in using transform data. Every time I have to Google and find what I want. So that is what happening right now.
Yeah. So that means that your database is already put into something that could be used for a good star schema. A lot of people don't have that, and they got to start with doing all the transformations in this visualization, right? Which is Power Query.
Okay. So yeah, I did some star schema generation in Power BI only. But I think with the simple concepts. But no worries. If you have any transform data playlist like that can cover all available Power Query options, then you can share with me.
Yeah, so you can see like a ton of other people were putting links into the chat, and I would start going through those. And again, I would start with the Microsoft Learn, right? And then they have data sets that you could use. The other one that we recommend quite a bit is go out to the Workout Wednesday site and start doing their exercises. They have a lot of good exercises there. Guy in a Cube that somebody just posted again. We're on Guy in a Cube pretty much every Saturday. So a lot of us that are here are in the chat, and we're contributing to their stuff in the chat. So you kind of talk about, how long does it take to learn things like DAX and all of these concepts, and all of us are really kind of lifelong learners. We learn all the time, even though I've worked in the BI field for 30 years, and I'm still learning new things all the time on how to model it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would just say continue to look at different things, read on different things, hit these different sites that people have out there, and then find a passion project and find the data that's in a very raw form. And instead of getting it from something that somebody already put together in a SQL database, start with something that's just a dump into an Excel and turn it into a proper star schema.
Correct.
So, yeah.
So luckily I got a simple project from my professor and I did that. But now to advance that, no worries, I will join these sessions and actually it will help me.
Good, good. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody have any other questions before I turn the recording off? I see somebody just raised their hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So we are talking about DAX queries. I have mostly used DAX measures and all, but I have not used DAX queries in my projects. So just wanted to ask a very quick question about where do I actually write DAX queries in Power BI and see the results? Like all those summarize, column, and evaluate. Do I write it in create new table?
Well, if you're going to create a calculated table, you might end up writing it there, right?
Okay.
But with this feature, you're going to write them here now when you turn this feature on, and you'll have a DAX view from there.
Yeah.
So the DAX query itself, you cannot write the DAX query and give that to a visual. The visual is always going to write its own DAX query to make sure it's successful. But we use DAX queries in either, you could use it as to generate a calculated table, right? Which again kind of goes against the do it as far upstream as possible. That's really the better thing, is to move that functionality up into the Power Query, the transform data, if you can. But there's not saying there's not reasons to use it. Just try to do it extremely rarely. And then, like I showed here, you use these DAX queries. In my mind, what's good is to do it as your measure development process. So you could save these queries and see how you developed your measure, keep comments about it, kind of keep your history so your future self likes what you were doing. And then they'll be within this DAX query view within Power BI next time you open it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I have one more question, which is completely unrelated to today's topic, but if you can help me, because I am stuck on my project on that question.
I would suggest coming to our Thursday session this week. Amin, do you have that link real quick?
Yeah, and I just pushed it out at the beginning of the meeting, but that doesn't
push
mean
it against. Yeah, some people can't see it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, because then we'll have longer time to talk about it there. And then it's not anything that's being recorded, right? So we tend to share other screens and stuff like that during that time.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And I'll look for you on this Thursday. I still plan on being there and everything. We do it every Thursday, and then we'll try to get you on track or give you other information to go from there.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Please, yeah, great. Anyone else? All right, I'm going to stop the recording.